Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to people who are in America. I am speaking with Missyhalle today, who has recently had, or quite recently, had a beautiful baby girl thanks to donor conception. And she is sharing her story with us today and talking about what it's like to have created a family through sperm donor conception as a same-sex couple. So have your questions ready. She's going to be not just sharing her story, but imparting words of wisdom about things to consider, how to navigate as a same-sex couple, what it was like to choose a sperm donor, and also particular tools they may have used when they were tracking fertility in advance of treatment, the treatment plan options, how they were supported by their sperm bank to select their donor. So all of these things she's going to be telling us about. I'm just going to see whether she's here and then we can go. Nice to see people today. Hi. Hi, everyone. Be good to know where you're joining from. Hello, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
It's lovely to see you both.
Thanks. It's lovely to see you.
And you've had a new addition since we last spoke.
We have a very hungry new addition that just woke up from nap time.
Aww. So much for sharing your story today.
Thanks.
We're talking about what it's like, obviously, to go down the sperm donor route and how you were supported by California Cryobank to steer that journey and find the donor for you, and really the considerations and factors that came into play as a same-sex couple starting out for on the path to expand your family. So tell us a little bit about you guys to start with.
So we live in Cleveland. I got started as a content creator, 2020?
Yeah, during the pandemic.
2020. And when we got married in 2020, we had discussed obviously starting a family. And so when we started looking at what the process looked like, we knew we wanted to work with California Cryobank because they had the largest abundance of donors that kind of fell into the category of what we were looking for. We wanted to find a donor that was reflective of both, either one of our ethnicities at the time. We chose to find a donor that's Korean to reflect my wife's ethnicity. And they just had the most options. So yeah, that's what got us started on our donor journey.
I love the fact we're having this conversation because I used California Cryobank as well. My husband and I did. So we've used the same bank to help us have our families. And so your journey into motherhood, parenthood, how did you start? Did you just one day say, right, now we want to get going? Was there information out there to help you with the first steps?
Kim definitely jump-started our journey. I'll let her fill you in on that part.
Well, I mean, I think it kind of like, to fill in some context, when we first met, we were both older. We were both in our mid-30s, and we knew we both wanted to get married and have kids. So that was kind of like the first question that we asked each other on our first date, because if the answer was you don't want to have kids, then obviously there was no reason to move forward romantically. So that jump-started everything pretty much. And then after we were engaged, I had asked Melissa, I said, okay, so what does your timeline look like on having kids? Because, we're not necessarily the youngest that
I love how that keeps coming up.
And so Melissa had told me her timeline was like, I want to date for a year, be engaged for a year, be married for a year, and then try to have a baby. And I was counting up the numbers of years, and we suddenly were at a wall. And I asked her, I was like, well, how much time do you think you have? Because it may not work on the first try. And that's definitely a reality for a lot of people. And so that kind of like really sort of lit a fire under moving as quickly as possible, just to kind of see what the process looks like, because we didn't know how involved it actually was until we were in it.
And there wasn't that much information, honestly, about, what that journey looked like. Obviously, from having friends, that took a fertility journey as a same-sex couple, we knew, that the general options were IUI, IVF, and at the time, I don't even think we knew about ICI.
Yeah, and we didn't know about reciprocal IVF either. Like, we didn't know, like, there were just a lot more options to think about, you know, whether you wanted to go least invasive to most invasive, least expensive to most expensive. So we definitely had our work cut out for us when we were first researching it, everything.
So did you start with fertility tests, or did you jump straight into finding a sperm bank?
So we started, I love how you say start with fertility tests. We actually switched healthcare systems because when we started, we went and they more or less were like, okay, track your ovulation and you know, we can get started, pick a donor. And I was like, what, there's no tests that you run to see like if I'm fertile, like my egg supply, like anything. And there was literally nothing. They required us to go get counseling with a therapist in order to get a sign off on using a third party donor, which is standard for everyone in the state of Ohio. But other than that, I was like, you're not even checking like my hormone levels. So, you know, we did the mandatory counseling. We went and picked a donor. Now, luckily, I had done genetic testing through 23andMe. And so I knew essentially kind of what my my genealogical background looked like because I got the expanded test. So when we were looking for donors, we ended up choosing California Cryobank, obviously largest, you know, amount of options. And we chose to do the extended background on all of the donors that we were considering, which is such a great feature that Cryobank offers. Being able to see, you know, what genetic traits they carry and what that means for, you know, any offspring that we had.
And actually, at that moment, I'll just say to anyone who's interested in looking for a donor, I have a code which is I think it's 0316UKC, and that's it's worth $250 to search all of their database of donors, which means that you can just look through everything that you want to search and make the most of their incredible filters and all the criteria that you're looking for, because it can be a bit overwhelming, can't it, starting and thinking what's for us. Dismissing people that may have been a really good option. How do we know if we pick the right person? Did you have the same feeling with that?
Yeah, it was definitely overwhelming. I think we knew from the get-go we wanted to have a child that reflected both of us ethnically. So we chose a donor that is full Korean. I'm half Korean, so at least, you know, our daughter is half Korean now, and kind of sort of looks like me in some way. But then we delved further and, like, you know, filtered out by education. We wanted somebody who wanted, I guess, some of my personality traits, since I wasn't going to be genetically related to our child. So we wanted to try and filter into as much as we could. I mean, it's kind of like a grab bag when it comes to genetics, but some personality traits that would reflect more me in her, you know, because of the donor. And so we found somebody who has a job in public service. I'm a nurse, and I do a lot of travel nursing, and so I will go to hard hit areas, and especially during COVID, that's what I did. Wow, really great to find somebody who did that as well. Somebody who was adventurous. He backpacked across Europe by himself. We got to hear a lot of like interviews that he had done. We read some essays that he had written. So he was very well educated, expressed himself really well. Just ultimately, we felt like it was a really good fit, personality and, you know, with his ethnic background.
And that, I think, was one thing that we really loved about California Cryobank, is they offered all of that, right? So we were able to read the essays, we were able to hear his voice and kind of get a grasp for how, you know, our donor saw the world and how he navigates in it. And I just feel like we pretty much got everything that we wanted in regards to finding the closest match that would allow us to reflect our family with our child.
Amazing. And in terms of psychologist support, was that important to you prior to selecting a donor and starting the process?
Are you referencing the therapy appointment that we had to have to use? Okay. So before we actually met with the therapist, I was annoyed that we had to kind of pass, pass a checklist in order to be allowed to grow our family, right? Because there are people that end up pregnant accidentally, and there's no requisite education, there's no requisite counseling for them. But after we actually sat down with the therapist, I really do feel like it's of value. I feel like she brought up some topics that we hadn't even really thought about, like the odds of our child possibly dating a sibling at some point, or realizing that, they do have a donor sibling geographically close to you. How do you navigate that conversation? When do you plan to have that conversation? And the reality of other people that aren't having that conversation, and how that plays into, your child meeting/dating their donor sibling. And so I think she gave us a lot of insight as to how to navigate those conversations effectively. We had already obviously planned on explaining earlier that we used a third party to create our daughter. Just genetically, I think she would have figured that out. But I do think that there was definite value in it, being on the other side of it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned a little bit about your experience of selecting a donor. What advice would you give to people who are maybe starting out or into the process, especially for same-sex couples who are selecting a donor? What would your advice be?
I think number one is to figure out, I guess, do you want to have your child look like one parent versus the other more, depending on who's carrying? I think that's definitely your number one conversation that needs to happen. And then what we did is we individually searched through and picked our top 3 that we felt like that we connected with. And then we took those 3 and came together and we narrowed them down, and we ended up actually choosing the one that we had in common. So I figured that's probably a good way to go too.
I would say figure out what's most important to you. For us, it was balancing our ethnicities, and that's where we started, right? So we started with looking for a Korean donor. And then after that, I think education was probably my second importance, because we wanted to make sure that we felt like we had a child that mirrored us, on an intellectual level. So I think having those conversations, whether you want to break out with a piece of paper and label 1 through 5, what is most important to you, and then kind of narrow it down. Because I think analysis paralysis, as they call it, kind of kicks in when you're like, oh my God, I have all of these options. I don't know where to begin. Really figuring out your priorities helps a lot.
Mm-hmm. When we were searching for our donor, it felt like a bittersweet scenario, because my husband's infertile, and so we were almost looking to find someone that replicated some of his character and also the way he looks. And obviously everyone is unique, so you're never going to find someone who's exactly the same. You're right, all of those things come into play. We had the most amazing support from California Cryobank when we were navigating that, who were really instrumental in helping us decide how many vials we might want to consider getting, what kind of vials we might need to work with having IVF, help with the shipping process, also helped with the selection process, what we might want to consider, and the filtering and working out through the website. So I think all of those things, for us, it just took time, and we had to sort of circle back to where we were to really make sure that we felt comfortable, and we didn't land on the same preferred donor. But actually the donor that we've gone with, who is now our 3 children's, biological father, if you like, or donor, he was the person my husband wanted to go with from the beginning. So it did work out in the end. And you probably feel now like a lot of that has disappeared, that all those thoughts and all that consideration process. It's amazing how when you've gone further on that journey, and you're holding baby in your arms, some of those things that you were thinking about don't become less relevant. Of course they're relevant, but some of those big decisions you have to make just feel like a little bit in the past. Have you thought about whether you might want to have a sibling, whether you want whether held vials for the future? Like, is that something that you were considering when selecting your donor?
Yes.
Yes.
We have vials still remaining from the donor that we used to have baby Breslin here. And I think before my delivery, the answer was yes, we totally would want a sibling.
By the way, it was a big document that.
Yeah, so I was a very traumatic birth situation. I ended up having to have an emergency cesarean. I suffered from preeclampsia late in pregnancy. So I'm gonna tap out, I think, on doing it again.
Well, we're on the fence because we have one embryo left, which is with California Cryobank, and my husband and I have differing thoughts on where we go with that. It's a big thing to navigate, so I'm with you on that. But outside of using California Cryobank for donor sperm, did you do any other services with them, like embryo preservation or file storage, like I just mentioned we did with our embryo storage, or also the cord bloods program, which sounds really interesting?
So we only had one embryo. We went from 14 eggs to one embryo, and I'm holding said embryo terminal baby. So we really, really were completely blessed with that. So we didn't do any embryo storage. We didn't have any, but we did do the cord blood registry and storage.
Okay. And what does that mean for the cord blood?
What I loved was how many different diseases maintaining the cord blood and storing it actually treats. So if, you know, Breslin ends up with any blood diseases or, I mean, cancer, leukemia, any of those, we're able to treat it obviously with stem cells, which are very, very effective. I read in helping to treat things that may arise down the line. And if we do decide to have, you know, a sibling for her, you know, it's something that could be applied there as well. So it was really important to us to do everything we could to really protect our daughter.
Yeah, and Cryobank was really great too, because they sent this whole kit, and then basically, you know, the providers at the hospital knew exactly what to do with this. We just said, hey, we have this kit, so when the time comes, they, you know, they were able to save the cord blood and the actual cord tissue. And then, like, literally, there's a number on the box that you call, and they send a courier to wherever you are to pick it up, and then they send it off to have it be put on ice and stored away. So it was very, very, very simple process.
I do regret not doing that. I think it's great that, you know, you knew about this and you were empowered to make that decision.
They made it very easy, especially with everything that's going on in the hospital, you know, postpartum. The last thing you want to think about is really coordinating, you know, shipping, and they made it so simple for us. So we're very, very grateful that we were able to do that.
Have you recovered okay now?
Oh yeah, I'm fantastic now. I think the recovery was really rough, like the first couple weeks being home and kind of having limited mobility. The memory does fade as time goes on, so my answer may change. But I think, you know, there's still odds that you would like to actually be pregnant. So see her face.
I really enjoyed, you know, watching your pregnancy evolve. It was really wonderful, especially as we had a live together years ago, I think during COVID, when you were just, did you have a failed cycle before?
I had 2 failed IUIs the last time that we spoke, and looking back at the date, I'm not sure if it was after our IVF cycle or whether I was in the midst of it. But it's really, really great to be back live with you and be actually holding.
I
know. It's crazy how it took up so much time and energy. And I mean, and as me as an innocent bystander, you know, I was away for so long of her beginning IVF cycle that by the time I got home, it was literally time for the transfer. I was like, what happened? And then here we are, you know, fast forward a year, and we have this 2-month-old.
Well, you're looking incredible.
Thank you.
Do you feel like you have good support? Is that something that you would say is important?
Do I feel like what?
You've had a good support network around you during.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. We've got, you know, such a large amount of chosen family. I talk a lot on my platform about the importance of it. Because we don't have, you know, biological family that live close, and a lot of our biological family isn't very supportive. So we're so fortunate to have had so many different people that are stepping in as, you know, aunts and uncles that are close to us and our daughter. So we've been really blessed with that.
Yeah.
Really, really nice. I love that. And we talked a bit about going back, sorry, to the fertility part, you know, being told to track, monitor your fertility, which I'm sure many people who are watching this back will relate to, and I certainly can do. When you had, you know, a couple of rounds of IUI, which and switched up work, how did you kind of pick yourselves up? Because it's really hard. It doesn't work.
Yeah, I remember the second, was it the second IUI?
Yeah.
Melissa had come with me because I had taken a job in DC. So she had come with me the weekend before so that we could explore DC together, and it was Mother's Day weekend. And we had done the transfer like a week before, I think, or done the IUI a week before. And Melissa was getting these, oh, excuse you.
That was such a good burp. I'm so sorry.
Melissa was getting these feelings and inklings, like I think I might be pregnant, and she wanted to take the test on Mother's Day because she was like, well, if it's positive, like what a blessing it would be to have a positive on Mother's Day. And then it ended up being negative, and it kind of I just watched her entire like self shatter. And it was just really, really emotional for that fail in particular, I think, because we were so hopeful and we felt like we did everything right. But really, you know, in those tries, you never really know what you're going to get. So, yeah, I think that was the hardest part was watching her kind of crumble, and then me kind of, you know, all I could do was just hug her and you know, be with her in that moment. So
I think for me, yeah, that try really does bring back a lot of memories, especially considering it was Mother's Day, and I really genuinely, with everything in me, thought that I was pregnant. Had a million symptoms. I think it was difficult, but shortly thereafter, I found out that our company was now, you know, changing their insurance coverage to include IVF. And I think that was kind of the silver lining to the situation, was finding out, hey, we now have coverage if we want to pursue IVF, which has a higher success rate by far. You know, it is more likely to result in, you know, that big fat positive and that pregnancy that we wanted. So they announced that in June. We went ahead and I had my consultation like June 4th. It's like 3 days after they announced the coverage started. And we definitely jumped on the train for IVF and everything that entailed, and really gave it everything we had. And we were very, very fortunate because, as we all know, IVF does not always equal a baby, and it does not always work. So
Amazing.
I'm just really fortunate.
Yeah. And did you change clinics?
Yes. Yes, we did.
The entire hospital system.
Did you?
As I said before, I just didn't feel as though our first hospital system really did sufficient testing, and I wanted to have a more involved healthcare system. And off the bat, even for my first consultation, you know, they ran blood work. They were like, okay, let's go ahead and see, you know, what your uterus looks like. I jokingly was like, you're not even going to buy me dinner and a drink first. But they really were very thorough from the very beginning, and I felt as though, you know, we were on the right path.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good. So did you have ERA tests and mock cycle done?
Yes, we did. Especially because, you know, we went from 14 eggs to 2 embryos to 1 embryo. And so, you know, we had a very frank conversation with our reproductive endocrinologist, and he said, you know, am I saying that you need the ERA? No. Am I saying that you have to do it? Absolutely not. He goes, but my question is, if you don't do it and the transfer doesn't work, are you going to regret not doing it? And all I could think was, oh my goodness, I'd be stuck in a cycle of self-loathing if I didn't. So we did the mock cycle, despite the fact, you know, that bumps you back a month on your timeline. But it came back, you know, on all 3 measured levels that, you know, my uterus was great, very hospitable, 5-star hotel. And we were able to schedule the transfer the following month. And it worked. So I'm glad that we did it. I'm glad we had that conversation with our doctor.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being so open about your journey today.
Absolutely.
anyone who has joined and you're looking for a sperm donor, then please do check out California Cryobank. The link is in the bio. All three of us have used California Cryobank to build. So they're offering our readers $250 worth of subscription to be able to go in and search all of their donors. So it's quite a long code, but I will write it down. It's W0316UKC for anyone who wants to check out the donors. And so with your donor, how much did you see? Do you have the same as us, which is kind of a voice recording?
Yep.
Characteristics, obviously full medical background going back generations, drawings of facial, structure, etc.
Yep. The only thing we didn't get to see, and this was just because the donor opted to not share it, was an adult photo of our donor. But we got to see everything else, and honestly, that it's really worth going that extra level and getting the higher package, because we got to see so much of who our donor was. And really
saw
see
baby photos. I think there were a couple of childhood photos, which really helped. And now that she's getting bigger and older, we can kind of start to see some of those facial features and characteristics come out. So,
because we're talking to our children about their conception, and it does kind of go in one ear and out the wind and out the other, because they're quite young still. But and you think you've had this conversation, and then the next time I speak about it, or we speak about it, but it has been really interesting to look at our donors' baby, or not just baby, but childhood photos, because we're really starting to see some resemblances there. In that conversation about, different traits and characteristics, and all of the above. So what would be, for anyone watching who's navigating this journey, however they're doing it, what would be your 3 top pieces of advice?
Remember to give yourself some grace going through the process. It is lengthy, it's arduous, and no matter which path you're taking, ICI, IUI, IVF, give yourself grace and lean into your partner, because sometimes these things pull you apart, but they can also bring you together. So that's gonna be my number 1 piece of advice.
I think mirroring off that, communication became so important. I feel like extra important in this process, because the hormones themselves are enough to kind of make anybody crazy. And then so when you're not experiencing them yourself, it's hard to put yourself in your partner's shoes as to what they're going through. So I think for the person going through the process with the hormones and all that stuff, whichever route you choose, it's important for you to convey kindly and, respectfully what you're feeling, because your partner doesn't always know what that feels like. And then for the person that's, the partner in this, it's also important for you to tell your birthing partner, I guess, how this is impacting you, because they may not be able to see outside of themselves in that moment.
Fantastic advice.
She's very chatty.
She's communicating.
Thank you for sharing her with us today, and for being so open. Really appreciate it, and it was lovely to see you again.
It was lovely to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.